Good afternoon. This is Dan Rohner. I'm the Director of Leadership Development and Pastoral Planning for the Archdiocese of Dubuque, and I am here to welcome you to the Catholic School Board Summer Update. The primary part of the presentation will be delivered by Jeff Henderson, the Superintendent of Schools. I'm in Dubuque. Jeff's in his office in Cedar Rapids. Hi, Jeff.
Hello, how are you?
Very good. Thank you. Thanks for registering for this webinar and for your participation. As you may know, we've had a series of these webinars during the summer, and the purpose of the seminars has been to give some basic information in the various areas of leadership in parish life. Before we go into too much detail with that, though, I'd like to begin with a prayer. And the prayer that I'll be using is the prayer that was written in observance of the 175th anniversary of the Archdiocese. It's a prayer that we say every day here at the Pastoral Center, and it may be one that you're familiar with from being said in your parish or elsewhere. Loving God, you called us each by name and gave your only Son to redeem us. In your faithfulness, you sent the Holy Spirit to complete the mission of Jesus among us. Open our hearts to Jesus. Give us the courage to speak his name to those who are close to us, and the generosity to share his love with those who are far away. We pray that every person throughout the world be invited to know and love Jesus as Savior and Redeemer. May we come to know his all-surpassing love. May that love transform the Archdiocese of Dubuque and every element of society. We make this prayer through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Mary, Mother of the Church, pray for us. Saint Raphael, the Archangel, be our guide. As I mentioned, the purpose of these webinars is to give some basic information about various roles in the parish. And we came up with this plan to do this during the summer after our experience over the last few years in implementing the revised guidelines for the parish pastoral councils. During the last 3 years, we have provided a number of in-service activities that have been related to these new guidelines. And we have found that we've had various levels of success in getting that information to the parish. Some parishes were very good about distributing that, and others were not quite as successful. And of course, during the last 3 years, there have been new people who have been elected or appointed or have volunteered for various leadership roles in the parish. And the idea with these webinars is to provide some basic information about the roles and responsibilities of members in these leadership bodies. In future years, in future summers, the webinars will be primarily designed for new members. This year, we're inviting everyone to participate, and of course, in future years, anyone will also be welcome. But the primary audience will be those who are new to those roles, so that they can get somewhat of an orientation to their responsibilities. I mentioned the Manual for Parish Pastoral Councils. That was published in August 2009, promulgated by Archbishop Hannes. And these guidelines were designed to update or enhance the guidelines that had been in place since 1985. And I had asked you in your registration materials to find a copy of that binder in your parish and review pages 33 through 35, which deal specifically with the Faith Formation Commission and the Catholic School Board. If you haven't had the opportunity to see that, I'd recommend that you try to find a copy of that binder and review that, because it does give the basic information on the purpose of your body, the Catholic School Board, who becomes members on that board, and what the primary functions are. Today, Jeff will be speaking in more detail about those functions and responsibilities and give suggestions and tips on how to be successful in your role on the board. In the binder, there is also some information on the history of leadership in the church. And the history went all the way back to the days of the Acts of the Apostles, when every baptized person was expected to take on the responsibility of evangelizing and growing the faith. And that continues to be an expectation and part of our baptismal call. But through the years, as the church grew, there became the need to establish leadership roles and create an organization to manage the size of the church. And if we fast forward up to the 1950s, if you were around in the 1950s, you may recall that being a time when the work was primarily being done by priests and religious, while those of us in the laity were really only expected to do three things. One was to pray. The second thing was to obey the laws of the church. And the third thing was to provide support through our contributions to support the work of the priests and religious. Sometimes you may have heard that referred to as pray, pay, and obey. When Vatican II started 50 years ago, the documents that were coming from the Vatican II conference, though, really recalled this responsibility that we all have as baptized persons and called for greater activity or greater involvement of the laity in the life of the church. From those documents of Vatican II, canon law went through a revision, and in 1983, part of canon law said that each diocese should have a pastoral council made up of laypersons and other people within the diocese as an advisory body to the bishop. So canon law says that the bishop needs to have a pastoral council to advise him. And in the Archdiocese of Dubuque, we have an Archdiocesan Pastoral Council that does just that. Canon law further states that it's left up to the discretion of the bishop to decide whether or not he wants to establish parish pastoral councils. And of course, in the Archdiocese of Dubuque, the Archbishop has decided that that would be a good thing. And so we have the parish pastoral council structure along with the various committees, commissions, and boards that we're familiar with in the parish. From 83, from that document, or part of the document from Canon Law 1983, the guidelines for parish pastoral councils were established, as I mentioned, and that document really guided the organization that we have become very familiar with today. Meanwhile, in the late 90s, there was an archdiocesan-wide effort to look to the future, and some of you may have been involved in the late 90s in what were described as speak out sessions that led to the publication of Vision 2000. So in late 1999, Vision 2000 was published, and it was described and continues to be described as the vision for the Archdiocese for the 21st century. And within Vision 2000, there are four main areas of focus. One is Word of God. The second is families. The third is community. And the fourth is leadership. So with Vision 2000 and with this revised manual that was published in 2009, we really have two guiding documents that help us understand the role of the laity in parish life today. And that sets the stage then to talk about, in specific detail, the functions and the responsibilities of the Catholic School Board. And so with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Jeff. And as I mentioned, Jeff, you may know Jeff as the Superintendent of Schools for the Archdiocese. Jeff, take it over.
I would be happy to. Thank you very much, Dan, for all that introductory information. The place where I would like to start with is the whole concept of mission and vision. Every successful board, commission, you can make a case for Congress and presidential elections. So much of it's driven by mission and vision. And in the Archdiocese, we are no different. We try to operate with a diocesan level educational mission, which you see on your slides right now. And basically, there's a 5-point support, if you will, for this mission to promote lifelong formation for everybody. And we believe these 5 create kind of the pillars upon which we build what we do for every educational formational program in the Archdiocese, whether that's a religious education program, youth ministry, assisting with those that are disabled and have issues in stemming from those kinds of disabilities and challenges, all the way to our schools. And so this mission that you're looking at needs to be the overarching process that every board and every commission needs to look at that involves themselves with education and in this case schools. The other part of that then is while we have a diocesan mission, which you see before you, every school really should have some sort of mission statement that derives at its very heart the whole concept of that we want to be first and foremost Catholic institutions. We are not private schools. We are indeed parochial schools committed to Catholic values and Catholic schools and Catholic education. In addition to that mission then, every board should have and every school should have a vision for what they want to be like in 5 years with a roadmap on how to get there. Because it doesn't do you any good to have this wonderful mission statement or to have this goal if you don't have a vision as to how you're going to achieve it. And every one of those plans needs to include a very specific timeline, who's in charge of what, and how often they report to not only the board but to the community. Those schools that are committed to that kind of approach, where they have a local mission statement deriving from our mission statement, creating then a vision for the future, generally speaking, are very successful in everything that they do. Those that choose not to have that kind of vision, that kind of planning, oftentimes run into problems and crisis situations that can be avoided. Within that concept then, every Catholic school board has direct and indirect relationships with key components of the Archdiocese as well as the local entities. Starting first with the local parish. Schools generally come in two forms. We have single parish schools that are affiliated directly with just one parish, and then we have schools that are directly related to several parishes that help support that school's operation and so forth. So the key component is developing a relationship that's based on the following, and that's very important to remember, and that is that the parish is not there to serve the school. The school is there to serve the parish. And those places, those schools that look at themselves as independent entities away from the parish and that the parish just needs to give them money all the time will not be successful for any length of time. The school needs to understand as part of their vision that they're committed to doing whatever it is the parish needs to make the parish stronger, because strong parishes will lead to strong schools. Strong schools don't necessarily relate back to having a strong parish. If you don't have a strong parish, the school's life expectancy is shortened. So make sure that you have a very strong relationship with the parish. Second of all, there is a legal corporation for all of our schools. And those corporations are basically just like a parish relationship. These corporate relationships are structured very similar. And that is, we have corporations that schools are separate corporations supported by several parishes. We also have a corporate structure where the school is underneath a single parish a corporate structure. This corporate structure is important to have in place because this becomes the legal entity, by law entity, that structures the school. Within the Archdiocese, there are hundreds of corporations. They are all separate, but yet all tied together, because all of them have as their president the Archbishop. The Vicar General is the vice chairman of every one of our corporations, and the local pastor or pastoral coordinator is a third member of the board, of the corporate board. And then there are two lay members of the corporate board, usually the chair of the local school board and the vice chair of the local school board. When we have interparish connections, that corporate structure is that way. At the local board, where it's just tied to a single parish, the corporate structure is such that the local entities come from the parish council and are usually the chair and vice chair of the parish council. This corporate board exists primarily as a legal entity recognized by the state for purposes of being a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. It also serves a structure as another level of oversight for the local board, primarily as it relates to long-range planning that results in new construction, remodeling, expenditures over $5,000 not in the budget, and so forth. All require approval by canon law, as Dan mentioned earlier, require approval of the local board. So the local board cannot just decide willy-nilly we're going to tear down the school and build a new one. It needs corporate approval, which runs through the corporate board, and there's a proxy form that is sent to the Archdiocese, which begins that process. Then also, every state or every school in the Archdiocese is accredited by the state of Iowa. That means all of our teachers have a license to teach in Iowa, all of our administrators have a license to teach in Iowa, and our rules and policies and so forth not only conform to canon law, but conform to state law. The nice part about working with the state of Iowa is that, and once in a while we have to fight for these, but the state legislature is very good about recognizing the fact that they cannot create laws that directly violate our religious freedoms. And so when it comes to the teaching of, for example, human growth and development, we are allowed to teach abstinence as our only form of human growth and development. Public schools obviously have a little more broad-based approach to how they approach that issue. We are exempted because we do not have to worry about doing things that violate our constitutional rights. I don't want to get into the whole national debate. This isn't the forum for that. Also, you also have a relationship with the Archdiocese and directly with the Archbishop, and that comes once again from canon law. We develop policies that every school and every school board needs to follow. And I think it's really important for you to understand that these policies exist not to make your life more difficult, rather the opposite. It's to protect you from making mistakes that could come back and be very problematic for you. And we'll talk more about policies coming up. And then there's the relationship every school board has with me as superintendent of schools, because it's a very unique relationship. Many of you are used to the concept of a public school model where the local board basically has hiring and firing privileges to the superintendent. You don't have those with me. I report to the Archbishop. He has the hiring and firing power over my position. The local school board does not. To a certain degree, the local school board reports to me as it relates to the enforcement of policies, the following of policies, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So it's a very unique relationship that the school board has with me. The best way to communicate with me is through the chair or the pastor of the local school. That keeps the communication lines a little cleaner, if you will, a little more open, and generally pretty successful. Then there's the local leadership, which is vital to the success of any school board. It starts with the pastor or pastoral administrator. And as I said earlier, the pastor is appointed by the Archbishop for wherever there is a single parish supporting a Catholic school. That pastor is on the board. That pastor has certain responsibilities related to the religious formation of the local school. The pastoral administrator is also appointed by the pastor or by the Archbishop, and the pastoral administrator is also directly responsible for the religious formation and programming for those schools that are supported by many parishes. Pastoral administrator serves on the board and is a voting member of the board, as is the pastor for the single parish schools. Then there's the principal, who is the executive officer of every school board in the Archdiocese. That principal is essentially more like the public school model of a superintendent. He or she takes care of all aspects relating to the board and the board liaison to the teachers and the board liaison to the community. The principal provides information to assist in long-range planning. The principal is there to deal with personnel issues and so forth. It's a very important position. My office helps all local school boards hire new principals when those positions come open, and unfortunately, if there's issues with the principal, the board deals with me and works with the principals in those situations. There is also a formal relationship between the local Faith Formation Commission and the local school board. The Faith Formation Commission is involved in ensuring that the religious formation of the students takes place. Now, they do not have direct power, if you will, over the Catholic school board to make those decisions. It's more of what I would call an advisory responsibility. It's very important, however, for the local school board to provide monthly reports to the local FFC concerning what is going on at their meetings, because nobody likes surprises. Now, the Faith Formation Commission, if they read that, oh, that there's a, I don't know, I'll give you a bad example, but let's say the local Catholic high school has an opening because their football coach resigned. The FFC has no power over who is hired to replace that football coach. That's the Catholic school board working with their administrator has that responsibility. But let's say that the local school is looking at doing some changes to its religious formation. Well, the pastor is going to assist the Catholic school board, but that needs to be formally reported to the FFC so that they also can weigh in if they have situations that they want to contribute to. And then there's the local teachers. Local teachers are also leaders within our schools. We try to rely heavily on them and their work with the students to provide the kind of program that we think is very, very important. And then, of course, there is you, the local Catholic school board. You are charged with the responsibility of making sure our schools are first and foremost Catholic, that we hire good teachers who do a great job in the classroom, that policies are followed, procedures are followed, that there's a long-range plan developed, that there's a budget and the budget is followed. You work closely with the administrator to make sure all of those things occur. Let's talk specifically about the role of the pastor. The pastor is an ex officio voting member of the board. But unlike any other commission, any other board, any other committee that exists at a local parish, the pastor does not have veto power over motions that are made at local board meetings. It's a very unique relationship. That's because we are accredited by the state of Iowa, and we need to have a board in place that has that is a true democratic board. So therefore, but the pastor still wields great influence over the board, as he should. He works with the parish council to make sure that he's an advocate for the schools as needed, or as an advocate for the parish council at school board meetings. Because once again, keep in mind that the pastor's primary responsibility is to that of the parish, and that the school is there to serve the parish. So once in a while I will field phone calls from upset board members because they're upset because the pastor is not quote-unquote supporting the board. Well, oftentimes it has to do with finances, and there are times when the pastor has to look at the finances and realize the school needs to do more to be more self-sufficient. Keep in mind that does not mean he's against the school board. It just simply means that he's doing his fiduciary responsibility relating to the parish. So that can get a little tense at times, but keep that in mind. The pastor is also involved in the religious instruction of the school. The pastor can certainly wield influence as to what math series should be used, but the pastor needs to make sure that the religious or theological components of the program, the masses, the prayer services, the retreats, all fall on him not to do, but to make sure that whatever is presented is indeed teaching Catholic values, Catholic faith, and Catholic instruction. We do look for the pastors to support the schools, and they are strongly encouraged to do so. We are very fortunate to have an archbishop who is very much committed to Catholic schooling, very supportive of Catholic schooling, and works to make sure that his pastors are also very supportive of that. As it relates to you as a board member, let's talk about your qualifications and your responsibilities. In no particular order of importance, you need to be concerned about total Catholic education. Your primary responsibility is to that of the school, however. But you also have a responsibility to the Faith Formation Commission to make sure that religious education is strong for those families who do not want to send their kids to a school. That youth ministry is strong. That assistance to those that have disabilities or any kinds of other kinds of issues that we're trying to help them with, whether it's marriage preparation or whatever, that you're concerned with all of those programs. You need to be willing to serve. And that I realize that there are places that sometimes where we got to twist arms to get people to be on a school board, or twist arms to be on a pastoral council. We understand that, but you really need to be willing to serve, because school boards do take up time. They do have tremendous responsibility. It is, for the most part, a pretty thankless job, but nonetheless, you need to have that commitment to the church, to God, and to the teachings of Jesus to make sure that those are available for all of our students from preschool all the way through 12th grade. You need to have a willingness to contribute. not just to show up at meetings and be a wallflower, but to actually contribute to the discussion. Be willing to share your time and your gifts. You know, all of you were probably seen as someone who could maybe provide something that's really unique. Maybe you're really good with finances. Maybe you're really good with curriculum. Maybe you have a really strong, solid commitment to making sure that retreats are really, really well done, or that schools, buildings and grounds are well kept and well maintained. That's a talent you have. That's a God-given talent that you have, and you need to share that with the group. You need to be willing to listen. Most boards are anywhere between 5 and 9 members, and you have all these people with these different gifts. Well, you may think you understand that that 3rd grade teacher just isn't very good because you've heard that all along from so many people. Well, you might come onto a board and realize, well, you know what? They don't like him or her as a 3rd grade teacher because he really pushes the kids. And some parents don't necessarily like that. Some parents love that. Well, you need to be willing to listen and to find out exactly and to make your own determination what is good and what's not so good. And then, of course, as a board member, you need to be a Catholic in good standing. If you're wondering exactly whether you've got issues or concerns, please take that to your local pastor. That's not something that we're going to determine. We will help pastors and board chairs make decisions as to if there are any issues in those regards. All right, let's talk about what your job is. You know, the task of the board, as I said earlier, you need to promote Catholic education in every form it exists in. You know, our role is pretty tough. We deal in a society that is become very, you could almost say anti-religious. Certainly TV shows, movies, and so forth create all sorts of conflict for kids and for adults. And we've got to make sure that we do our very best to promote Catholic education and what it means to be a responsible Christian in this society. Become knowledgeable through your reading. You know, take the time to read things. If your principal sends you a link to a article that he thinks or she thinks is really good, take the time to read it. When you get packets of information, take the time to read it. Listen intently at meetings and in situations like this where you're just trying to learn to become better. It's important to show up at meetings. I don't know how else to put it. You just need to be at the meetings. We understand once in a while you might be on vacation. We get that. But short of that, even if you're away for work, unless you're actually at work when a meeting's taking place, you can always call in. You don't have to, just be there physically. It's perfectly acceptable to call in. We do say, however, if you're calling in, please make sure you're there for the entire meeting and not just that part of that meeting that you want to hear about. You should be there for the whole thing. And then finally, you know, participate in decisions and accept decisions when they're made and support decisions. Even if you don't necessarily agree with the final outcome of a vote, you still need as a board member to support everybody else that's on the board. You know, we are never better than our weakest link, and it's important that if you don't agree, you don't let people know that. People will wade through that and divide and conquer, and it just doesn't create a good situation for board members. As it relates then to the functions of the board, there are basically what I call the 5 Ps. That if you stick to those 5 Ps, you're probably going to do a lot better job as a board member and a lot better job as a board. It starts first of all with policy. Then we're going to talk about procedures. Planning and evaluation, as I alluded to earlier, is vital. Personnel issues, and we'll talk about what you should and should not do with that. And then prayer. I can't emphasize that enough. You know, it's sometimes kind of trite, but we start our meetings with prayer. And I would encourage you that if you are responsible for prayer, don't make prayer just a quick Our Father. Take some time to do some faith sharing among the board members. 5 to 10 minutes is important. Reason being, when things get a little hairy, as they sometimes do, it's nice to make sure everybody's committed to that same gospel values. And prayer can set the tone. Prayer can also be used to invite God to your meetings, and the Holy Spirit can guide you in decisions you need to make. Let's talk then about, as we get into this a little bit, the role of the board administrator. The board administrator, the board principal, you know, the principal of the school, the chief administrator of the system, if that's what you have, is incredibly important. And how you develop that relationship, how you build on that relationship is going to be vital if you're going to be successful. It first of all starts with regular communication, and that's both ways. I've heard board members and I've heard principals complain about they're not communicating well with their board. Well, who's to blame? You know, does the pastor or does the principal share regular communication with the board on what's going on at the school? But does the board communicate regularly with the administrator on issues that he or she is hearing out on the street? That's really important. Respect and understand roles. And we're going to talk a little bit about that coming up. That what are the roles of the school board, and how can how can it work together so that everybody understands, okay, what's board responsibility and when does it become administrative responsibility? What's administrative responsibility and when does it become a board issue? And as you work to figure out what those roles are, and we're going to talk about some specific situations coming up, make sure you honor those lines of authority. Don't cross them. The moment you do that, problems develop instantly. And once again, we're going to talk about that. Fourth bullet under this, as it relates to policies and procedures, as I talked about earlier, make sure there are no surprises either way. Now, there are times you need to understand where the principal cannot, due to policies that we've created, particularly as it relates to personnel issues, there are certain things that he or she cannot share with the entire board, but will be sharing with the leadership of the board. And as the board becomes involved, they will get the information. Just like as a board member, if you are hearing things out on the street, share it with the administrator. Don't drag it to a board meeting and try to be a hero in front of other people. Let the administrator know ahead of time that, hey, I'm hearing things about our football coach that I want to share with you. I want to make sure you're aware of it. Oftentimes, the administrator can say, yes, I'm aware of that, and here's what we're doing right now about it. Or here's the rest of the story that you probably should be aware of. Make sure that you respect, support, and trust the administrator. I don't mean blindly. I don't mean no matter what he or she does, you've got their back. I'm just saying that out in the public, make sure you're respecting the administrator. No matter what has happened, make sure you respect. There'll come a time when if you need to make a change, we'll help you work with that, try to see what we can do. But keep in mind, publicly, you've got to be able to do that. I have zero problem if you as a board member, if you've got a serious concern with an administrator, go in, close the door, and talk to he or she about your concerns. And, no matter how heated the discussion gets, no matter whatever happens, you keep it in the office so that when the door opens, you've got each other's back. And that's great communication, that's understanding the roles, and I think that's doing a good thing to create for a stronger board. Keep in mind that the administrator is accountable to the board. If the administrator is doing things that you think are problematic, that violates policies or whatever, work through your administrator. If things don't change, go to the pastor, go to the board chair, who can then bring them to me, and I will become involved or try to work to resolve whatever the situation is. Try to figure out what are major and minor issues, and there is no hard and fast rule. I can't sit down and tell you these are 100% board and these are 100% administration. It really doesn't work that way. But let me give you a very specific example of what, how this can work and how things can kind of blow up in a big hurry. Give you a specific example. Let's say that you as a board member are hearing complaints, once again I'm picking on high school, hearing complaints about a football coach. Football coach is using language he shouldn't be using on the field, that he's abusing kids and so forth. Well, that's obviously a major issue. It's a potential contract issue. You need to take those to the administrator. If the administrator kind of poo-poos it and you believe it's still going on, take it to the board chair or the pastor, who can then bring them to me. Those are major issues. What are minor issues involving football coaches and coaches in general is parents who are upset about playing time for their kid. Well, I've heard this before. Well, in sixth grade, Johnny was just a phenomenal baseball player. He continued that in the AAU program or Babe Ruth League or whatever throughout his eighth grade year. Now, ninth grade, he's not playing varsity. I don't understand what's going on. That's not a board issue. Under no circumstances is that a board issue. You as a board member, board in general, never. Those are minor issues. They're major to the parents, and I understand that. But you need to look at the parent and say, have you talked to the coach? If the answer is no, well, send them to the coach. If the answer is, well, I'm not going to talk to the coach, blah, 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 well, you know what? Then it must not be that big of an issue. Okay? And you can always encourage them to take them to the administrator. The third thing, the next thing on here, don't ever lose your sense of humor. You're going to be dealing, most of what the boards deal with at a typical meeting are more procedural. But discussions will occur, and sometimes those discussions get a little hot and heavy. Well, don't lose your sense of humor in the process. Celebrate your successes. Attend the ceremonies. If there's a sixth grade musical, I'm not saying you go to every one of them, but once in a while show up at those things. If someone's being honored for years of service, show up. Send them a little note. Make them feel good about the fact that you as a board, you're there to celebrate their successes. And then, encourage everybody, whether that's a parent, kids, whatever. Part of your job is to affirm the work that's going on because, for the 95% plus of everything we do is phenomenal. As soon as, you will learn that. And your job is to make sure that as strong as it is, it gets stronger, and to affirm what we're doing is good stuff and you're very happy about it. Board meetings, that you're going to be attending come in two forms: incredibly boring or incredibly dynamic. The difference really boils down to a well-planned agenda. I've been to board meetings literally where they read the minutes from the finance committee to the board. That's ridiculous. Have a finance report, absolutely. But if you have questions about it, then you have questions about the finance report. Otherwise, the report stands on its own. Those responsible for the agenda planning should be the principal, working with the board chair, and the pastor or pastoral coordinator. They should literally meet monthly to plan the agenda. It's not just one of their responsibilities to plan the agenda, because then, you know what, it's at the discretion of one person. That's a tremendous amount of power. I would never advise you do it that way. Next of all, make sure that you as a member always come prepared. You should get the packet at least 3 days before the meeting. If you're not getting the packet 3 days before the meeting, you know what? You need to get on your administrator about that, because they should have it to you either emailed or U.S. mail, or you pick it up after Mass at least 3 days before the meeting, so that you have a chance to read the reports, to read the agenda, and maybe even ask some questions before the meeting ever comes, because your job is to read that packet ahead of time. You need to contribute. Like I said earlier, don't be a wallflower. Be there, be engaged, and ask questions and add to the discussion. Keep the focus on the topics of the agenda. Don't swerve off into other directions. Keep it on the agenda. If the agenda is well planned, it'll have the topics you want. Because you are communicating and do a good job communicating, you can always send emails to those that plan the agenda saying, I'd like us to add whatever to the agenda, and they hopefully will. If not, certainly ask why. But do it ahead of time, not at the end of beginning of a meeting that evening, because very few things comes with those kinds of surprises. And then, it's important. If you want to have an effective meeting, know that we're starting at 6 o'clock sharp, not 6:10 because 2 people didn't show up. Start at 6 and end on whatever the time is that you want to end. And I would suggest at this time, this is really important, I think, meetings should never be more than 90 minutes. Once a year, maybe when you're working on the budget, or if you're suddenly building a new school, sure. Once in a while, you might go past 90 minutes. But if you're going longer than 90 minutes, then you probably are getting into areas you don't really need to be in. You're probably spending too much time on things you don't really need to spend time on. So, really work it. at ending on time. If you need to exceed 90 minutes, take a break. Don't just keep going to plug. Take a break, because people start losing focus, they start daydreaming, they start losing it after 90 minutes. So make sure you take care of that. The president has a very important role, as you'll soon discover. They should facilitate the discussion. That means that the president makes sure that everybody gets a chance to talk. You don't just have two people hogging the discussion all the time. The president should bring in others, to look over at Julie and say, Julie, what do you have to add? You haven't said anything yet tonight. What do you have to add to this discussion? And if John's talking all the time, to look at John and say, John, let's hear from other people and see what they say. Second of all, we really try to lead by consensus, and I'll talk a little bit about that coming up. The president also needs to make sure that, people get recognized for what they contribute, whether that's a board member, staff, whatever. The president, doesn't mean that he or she is the one writing congratulatory letters, but once in a while that's not a bad thing to do, but certainly make sure somebody's doing that. Let's talk about your board packets and the reports that you get. The finance committee report should be concise. The buildings and grounds committee should be concise. It shouldn't be any longer than it needs to be. We met on such and such a date. These people were in attendance. We talked about, this. We talked about that. Here's what we discussed. Here's what we need help with. And maybe at the end, we need board approval on the following. And then when you get the report, you concentrate on what the board needs to do. If there's no action needed by the board, you just simply receive the report. If there are questions, you ask them. But that speeds up meeting, makes them more accountable, and makes the committee work very important, and that's what we want to see. The report should say, like I said earlier, who prepared the report and when the report happened. And then, like I said, highlight those key issues. And if there's board action needed, make sure that's completely, very specifically listed. Following your board meetings, just make sure that, your minutes are unbiased and that they're accurate. That's why at the next meeting you approve the minutes. Because those minutes, trust me, I've been in court a couple of times. Those minutes are legal binding documents. So you want to make sure they're bloody accurate. If they're not, at the next meeting before they're approved is your time that you can revise the minutes to make sure that they are accurate. Make sure that someone follows up to make sure things that are supposed to occur. I can't emphasize this enough either. Sometimes you're going to hear things that really don't need to be brought out into the public. So make sure you honor, if you're told something confidentially, make sure you keep it confidential. Boards can sometimes get in trouble when information is being spread that doesn't need to be spread. Support decisions that are being made. Don't be a rogue board member that goes and says, I can't believe the board passed that motion that they did last night to, bring air conditioning into the school. What a waste of money, blah, blah, blah. You don't do that. Your job, fight the good fight, but at the end of the day, if you're in the minority on a vote, you're in the minority in the vote. You still need to support it. That's what, our national leadership is living proof as to why if they would simply support one another after they make decisions, life would be a little easier for all of us right now. And then there needs to be an annual board self-evaluation, and yes, we have instruments to help you with that if you'd like. Doesn't need to be terribly formal. It can be formal if you want, but the board should look at its goals. Did we achieve the goals? Look at the administrative goals. Did we achieve those goals? What prevented us from achieving them, or what are we going to start working on next? We have resources all designed to make it a little easier for you. The policy manual that we have. Every school has a policy manual with all 140 some policies that the Archdiocese has developed. You can take a look at them. You can also go to the Archdiocesan website and see all of our policies if you need to. There's a board member guidebook that's available for you. Your principal can get that for you. Then there are local policies that have been developed over the years that your principal can get for you, and you should be able to look at that anytime you want. And then board minutes, as I said, those are really important. Sometimes those kind of get looked over, but don't be afraid to ask for minutes from prior years as to what, how we discussed things at the local board and so forth. What decisions did we make and why? That would all be included in your local board minutes. Those reports that I've been talking about previously are important resources for you. And of course, the most important resource you really have is your local administrator. you really need to rely on him or her to give you accurate information, all the data you need to make good decisions, particularly as it relates to long-range vision. If you don't get anything out of today, please understand that I challenge every board to be looking down the road 5 years. If you do that, you're going to have a much more successful school than being reactive to everything that just dumps on your lap. All right, let's talk a little bit about how to be a good board member. I call it being Catholic School Board Member 101. Talked about those policies that I talked about earlier. We have policies, we have rules, and we have procedures, and I'm going to talk about those in just a second. Understand what executive session is and what executive session isn't. I'll talk about that in a second. How to handle groups that want to come and talk to the board. How to handle complaints, because as a board member, you're going to have them come to you no matter what you do. Your complaints will find you. What consensus is. And then I've already talked about meeting length. 90 minutes should be sacred. Okay, let's talk about policies now. Policies are developed by the Archdiocese on a broad range of topics that make sure that A, we are following canon law, and B, we are following state rules and state law related to accreditation. That's our policies, those are procedures. We don't have any policies and procedures that are not supported by either state law or canon law. So they must guide you in your action. They're there to protect you, and frankly, they're there to protect you from actions you may take that will later be very problematic. We review policies annually, so you will be made aware of them. That's good for you. That'll help. But that's one of the principal jobs of the board. It also helps give the executive officer, the principal, a sense of direction on how to handle issues. A lot of our policies relate to personnel. A lot of our policies relate to students, as you could well imagine. We have policies that say, okay, if you have to lay off teachers, this is how we do it. We have a policy that talks about what happens if someone brings a weapon to school. We have a policy on that. We have a policy that says, that our schools are going to be tobacco-free. And what happens if someone violates that policy? We have a policy that talks about how to handle divorced parents as it relates to their ability to look at records that their kids have. Those all exist. They're there to protect you. We also have rules and regulations that are developed locally to help guide the actions of the board. Okay? It's very specific. It talks exactly about what needs to be done, and that's the administrator's job, to make sure those rules are enforced and enforced consistently, which is why you need to have a mission statement, which is why you need to have a vision, because your local rules and regulations need to flow from that vision, need to flow from that mission. Okay? Let me give you a very specific, painful example of the difference between a policy and a rule. Okay? For example, you may decide locally that you want to have a dress code for your kids. That's great. We wholeheartedly endorse that. But since there's no canon law that says you have to have a dress code, there's no state law that says you have to have a dress code, the Archdiocese does not have any policy addressing that. So you might want to have a local one. So if I were you, I would develop a rule or local policy that says we'll have a dress code. I would never have a local policy that says what the dress code is. I would simply say we're going to have a dress code, and the policy, the dress code will be developed by the principal as he or she forms a committee to develop the dress code. Board's job is to make sure there's a dress code, not whether or not the kids are wearing a certain color slack or those kinds of things. That's the administrator's job. That will make your board member life a lot simpler to avoid that one. The next thing I want to talk about is under administrative, how to be a good board member 101 is executive sessions. Executive sessions are when you go into a closed meeting, because all of our meetings are open, but we do not have to follow the open meetings law that the state of Iowa has. But our meetings are open. If people want to come and listen, we don't want to close them out, so that's fine. They can come and listen. But once in a while, you need to discuss something, usually involving personnel or perhaps related to issues involving budget, where you go into closed session. The only people there are the board and probably the principal. They should be done very sparingly. You should rarely have them. Maybe once or twice a year you might have an issue that pops up. If you're doing them every month, something's wrong. Okay? The other thing about closed session is what happens in closed session stays in closed session. It's kind of like Las Vegas. You don't talk to anybody about what you talked about in closed session. If, for example, heaven forbid, you're involved in a situation where you need to terminate a contract, you're going to talk about that in closed session. But if there's a need to terminate a contract, that has to be done in open session. You can't do motions in closed session. Those have to be done openly. Once in a while, you're going to have a group that wants to come and talk to you. Well, only the chair or the pastor can approve the group. It's not your responsibility to say, sure, as a board member, I'll let you, why don't you come in and talk to us about it? Go to the chair. Someone approaches you, go to the chair, and they approve it. They will then work with the group to say how it's going to happen and how it's going to work. Don't get into a tit-for-tat kind of thing with delegations. If they come complaining about something or they want to do something, don't get into a debate with them. Ask questions, absolutely, but don't get into an argument with them. Be respectful and discuss the issue after the delegation leaves. Once in a while, you can make an exception to that, but for the most part, that's the way you should do. Handling complaints, it's really important to understand what to do because you're going to have complaints once in a while. I would get to know the staff. The more you get to know the staff, the more you get to see the other side of the story. Always have people, when people complain, look at them and say, hey, have you gone to the principal or have you gone to the teacher that you're complaining about yet? Well, no, I haven't. You need to do that first. It's not very Christian to talk about these people behind their back. Go to them first. If they don't want to, send them to the administrator. And then make sure when you get these complaints that you let the administrator know that you heard this complaint so that the administrator can be proactive about it. I think that's really important. And never look at somebody who's complaining and say, well, I'm on the board, I'll take care of that. Because you know and I know in lots of situations like this, there is another side to the story. And you don't have it at that moment. And you need to be very careful to make sure that you'll be respectful of them, but send them to the administrator or to the teacher or to the coach, and then follow up to make sure the administrator knows that you heard this complaint. If they don't seem to be resolved and they continue, make sure you take it to the administrator, what you're hearing. If they won't do anything about it or you don't think they're doing anything about it, go to the board chair, because oftentimes the board chair can kind of talk to you a little bit about what's going on. And if the board chair or the pastor decides that it's a problem, they'll bring it to me and we'll address it as an issue with the administrator. But make sure you follow policy. That just keeps you out of trouble. Consensus, we try to handle things based upon consensus, which means that, it's one of the most misunderstood words in the English language, I think. Consensus simply means that when you're debating something that's relatively controversial, that first of all, you understand the issue. Whatever it is you're talking about, that you as a board member really feel you understand the issue being discussed. And that all of your questions are answered. That doesn't mean they're answered the way you want them answered, but you have an answer to the question. Okay? And then third, you have reached consensus when you as a board member can publicly and privately support the decision, no matter how the vote is. If there's a 9-member board and the vote is 7-2 to do something and you're one of the 2, you still need to privately support it. Okay? Boards become dysfunctional once in a while, and generally speaking, it's because of one of these reasons. They've crossed that infamous little plane where they're really micromanaging the everyday operations of the school, using the dress code maybe as an example, or how you're dealing with personnel issues. That can become real problematic. If the board doesn't care, they're indifferent to what's going on, that's not a good situation. Board members need to be engaged. That perhaps sometimes there's internal division because you haven't reached consensus on issues before you voted. That can create division. That board members show up and they just have the single issue. They don't like the 3rd grade teacher and they're on the board to get that teacher fired. That's never going to work, and that leads to dysfunction. If you're a board member and you do have concerns about the 3rd grade teacher, make sure you make those known away from board meetings to the administrator. That the board doesn't read their packets, they come uninformed to meetings. That there's no vision. Once again, I mentioned that 100 times, but make sure that there's a vision, a 5-year plan always in place, building towards what you want to be. Or you have a bunch of board members that are lone rangers. They do their own thing, they don't follow policy. And as it says here, an effective board pulls together. Ultimately, we have 3 goals as a board. To improve student learning in a strong academic environment. You need to and that's permeated with gospel values. You need to understand academically, our schools need to improve, absolutely. But as you probably have read, Iowa used to be number 1 or number 2 in every academic measure known in the United States. We have fallen to 26 to 28, depending on what group, what you're looking at. If the Archdiocese were its own state, and there are days I wish we were, we would be number 1, hands down number 1. Second, to help students better assess their own strengths and areas of growth, we're trying to get these kids ready for life. That's got to be one of the goals you're committed to. And then to make sure that there's great communication among all interested parties. If you do that, you're going to be successful. And then finally, the last thing I'll leave you with is you obviously have a fiduciary responsibility to the parish, to the tuition-paying parents, and so forth. I think later we might have a separate webinar on finances, but for now, please understand every month you should get a balance sheet on finances. And if you can't understand exactly what it is, ask and demand that reports that are given to the board are clearly understood so you know where you are at financially. Okay? I'm sorry about talking kind of fast. Time kind of got away from me, I think, here. And Dan, do you have any questions that were typed in as well?
Some questions did come in, Jeff. We might be able to answer them in the last couple minutes. First question is related to executive session. When we go into executive session, do the minutes need to reflect the reason for going into the executive session, or can they simply say that the board went into executive session?
They should simply say the board went into executive session. They should never mention why.
Okay. Another question about being on the board. This questioner, I serve on another board that uses a consent agenda. And I've seen this used at public school boards under this minutes from previous meetings, staff reports, etc. Is that acceptable?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say probably about half to 2/3 of our boards do use a consent agenda. That's perfectly fine.
So we utilize that to approve all those items with one single motion.
Yes, exactly.
Yep. Another question asked about this software. Is the Archdiocese able to provide this GoToWebinar software in the case where a board member might not be able to be there present? I'll answer that one. I think it's unlikely that you'd be able to use the software subscription that the Archdiocese has simply because we use it a lot and it's difficult to coordinate right now. There's a couple options, obviously. One would be simply to call the person, and with people having cell phones, many times that call can be a local call, and at least you got the audio portion. If you want to have some visuals, we use Skype as a free, Skype is a free service that enables you to see each other and to speak to each other over the internet. That would be another possibility. I guess, there's other things that could be discussed. Jeff will show that slide at the end that has my contact information, and I'd be certainly happy to talk about some options in that regard.
The other thing is I'm more than happy to come out and do live in-service if the board is needed to that. I've probably done 3/4 of the boards in the last 7 years, though. There's our contact information. Any other questions, Dan?
Those are all the questions that we have.
The other thing we wanted to promote is on November 3rd, as we start concluding our celebrating of our 175th anniversary, we're also beginning the Year of Faith that's coming up. And that kickoff event is going to be on Saturday, November 3rd at the 5 Sullivan Brothers Center. And you can go on to the Archdiocesan website to enroll if you'd like, or register if you'd like to go. I'm happy to report that the Hawkeyes are in Indiana that day, so you're not missing a home Iowa football game for that.
All right, well, Jeff, thank you for that very informative presentation. Thanks for doing that right in the right amount of time. And again, you can see our contact information. Jeff, you indicated that you also have a Dubuque number, which is the same number as shown for me, except your extension, Jeff, is
307.
307.
Or 226. Either one will get me.
All right, very good. Well, that brings us to the end of our hour. Again, if you've got other questions, feel free to contact Jeff or me. And in fact, we will leave this webinar software open for a couple minutes as we finish formally. If you've got some questions that you'd like to ask, please send them in and we'll respond via email or in some other manner. You'll also be given the opportunity to provide us with feedback immediately after the webinar finishes. If you've got any immediate comments, please send them to us. And you'll also have an opportunity later this summer when we do a little more formal process of evaluating the success and the effectiveness of these webinars. With that, we will conclude. And again, thank you for your participation. We are recording this webinar, and the question did come up if can we access this information in the future? Yes. We will most likely be posting this to the website, so you'll simply be able to access the video or the audio, both of it actually, from the website. Stay tuned to information that would be coming from the parish office through what the Archdiocese refers to as the official bulletin. So later this summer, if you're interested in giving this information to other people, check with your parish office, and they should be able to tell you how to do that. Again, thanks for your participation, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you.